working? Can you hear me? All right. So there was a joke about taking a picture of me before the conference and after the conference, because obviously I'm gonna look totally different and probably a lot more wet after the conference. I'm gonna do like a kind of schizophrenic lecture, which is because I have some sort of a schizophrenic life. Yeah, of course, you know, I have JDS as an office, but we also work in design, as it was mentioned. And it's sort of like a new part of my career, which is embedded in like running a design studio, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So one thing that I always sort of give in the talks is sort of like just showing the office and showing how, like, what kind of people we are at the office. And it's a thing that we sort of proud of. It's this variety of provenance, like different cultures, sort of like coming together in order to do, you know, work that is, of course, like very spread internationally, but also very motivated by a sort of direction. And it's beautiful to see that people from different places can actually come together and think about architecture in a sort of in a way that it makes sense, or at least we think it does. You know, you can judge. So yeah, we work a lot, and you know, guess where is the sleeping guy from? That was mean, but like we basically have a sort of a portfolio that stretches in many different places. Like you can see that we haven't been working in the Philippines yet, but this is about to change, because tomorrow I'm actually going to visit a site to do a project here in Manila for a new building, a new iconic building in the Philippines, which I'm very excited about, and also, like, you know, I'm excited about discovering a sort of different culture and sort of understanding, you know, where you guys come from, and you know, maybe contributing to where you might be going. One thing that I like to say, like, to those of you who are young architects or students, is you know, there's a sort of direction in architecture today where more and more we see digital world sort of taking over our profession. And as much as I think it's a useful set of tools, I also think that it's extremely important that all of you sort of remember that the most sort of efficient mode of communicating architecture is model making. And why is that so? It's very simple. Architecture is you know, existing in reality, in a three-dimensional world with, you know, gravity, and models are the closest medium that we have to that issue. And what's beautiful about models in many ways is that you can sit there and evaluate all these ideas, and then you can actually execute a manipulation live. Like, you can do it right away, and you can check how it has changed your perspective on what you're doing. And this is something that no medium so far is able to compete with, which is, you know, maybe a sort of like a starting hint on the lecture that I'm going to give you, which has a little bit to do with praising low-tech rather than high-tech. And a lot of the things that we do have to do with trying to, like, manage to create a contemporary world that we want to live in, that is functioning, whether there is or not technology supporting it. So, I mean, just, you know, like, this is an exhibition we had in Brussels. It shows a lot of models, and this is really just to emphasize the fact that we work with models. And now, moving on to the ideas behind what we do. we have a complete disinterest in like formal approach. So anything you thought about what we do or who we are is like, if it has to do with formality or formal language, is really not what we're interested in. What we're interested in is a purpose, is actually to create a purpose in the work that we do. That doesn't mean that the work that we do isn't formally expressed, but that means that the foundations and what it aims at doing is a completely different thing. So this is actually a sort of few projects and concepts that we've been working with this other company called Makers with Agendas, or MWA. For those of you who like hip hop, you'll know the relationship. And it all started when we launched the first time our very small collection of products at the new museum in New York City. What we were asked to do basically was to actually explore the ground floor of the museum, which is a very public space, very lively space, and it has been the sort of like venue for a series of events. And one of the places that this ground floor has is the shop. And so what the new museum asked us when we were about to launch our company was, could you like do a launch at the new museum, but also deal with the idea of what it is to display artifacts and you know, the different elements that they have in the shop. And so what we did was basically, you know, this is Kazuyo Tsujima's and Nishizawa's masterpiece in New York. You know, they are sort of some of the most, one of my biggest architects that I have on my list. They're definitely like ranking top 2 after Lina Bobardi. What you know I had to deal with was basically to sort of inject some kind of a work into that place, which is of course a big burden. But the shop itself is very basic. You just have this wall that's undulating into the ground floor. And what we did was also like a similar approach, like a single piece of design, you could say, that can display like all the artifacts that they have in the shop, but it can also transform and undulate and react to different event conditions, because that place, as I said, is an extremely sort of lively and transforming place. And you can also like you know, in a way move our design away from the shop, so it becomes again what it used to be. And I think that's also like an interesting approach to design, is that you don't have to necessarily, you know, be present all the time. So this is the piece. It's basically this sort of this set of cubes that function together, that can compact from a sort of bigger display. And so the idea behind Makers with Agendas is to sort of move away from the idea, from beautiful design, which is, you know, a sort of direction that design has been very prominent lately. Mostly because, you know, if you look at the world's crises, like after 2008, you know, people had less money, so they're basically stopped buying homes, and eventually they stopped buying cars, and they started buying design. So like the world of design in the world of crisis has been actually tremendously rising and expanding, which is, you know, an interesting condition. The sad story about it is that it has been doing that in a way that is, in my mind, very irrelevant, which is to expand on the idea of beauty rather than actually looking at issues. And so what we're doing at Makers with Agendas is to completely flip the entire design brief around and to look at agenda-driven designs. And that means that we, instead of designing stuff, we actually looking at different society agendas and then exploring them and derive from those agendas potential answers which are, you know, existing in the design world. And so, you know, on the left of the screen you have the different agendas that we've been tackling at the office, and then on the right you have the different sort of answers that we've been giving to these agendas. And one of them that is, I think, interesting to sort of dive a little more into is the one of nomadic living. I suppose I'm a representative of the new nomads. I live in 3 different places, and in a way I sort of like to say that I don't really live anywhere, because a lot of time I just spent in sort of discovering new places or trying to apprehend the world as it evolves today. So, but what nomadic living means is that you have to sort of tackle issues of compactness. So like you have to make design able to be transported, and then also you should look at the idea of multi-use, so that a single piece can actually do various things, which is a very interesting and sort of like much more kind of architectural take on design. It's to sort of look at really the programmatics of design. And so, you know, this is a picture that is an interesting view on what we're doing. This is a screenshot of our entire design collection at the Makers of Agendas, and this is how it's becoming when you put it together into a compact storage. And so this gives you an idea of what it means to do compact design. And I'm not saying IKEA style, where, you know, you can put it together and then you're never going to put it together again, because it just cannot do it. It breaks apart. This is design that I actually thought through as collapsible and self-compacted design, so they really can handle that concept. And so a few ideas. One of them is it's called Stilt, and it's just, I guess it's maybe an architect wanting to not screw up architecture too much. So it's the idea of actually making a stand for pictures, so that you don't have to like put nails in your home. You know, if you have a beautiful concrete wall, you don't want to put a screw in it. So you know, then you use Stilt. And it started that way, and then it became like a sort of project that sort of evolved and became multi-use, and so it now is a shelf system, which I hope is going to play here. Yeah. So you can see like the sort of basics of it is, you know, a different sort of setup. Like you can, you know, change the height, change the size, change the location, and you can really kind of move it away. By the way, there's no sound on this. Is that normal? Because we have some cool music in our videos that you should you should hear. Anyway, T42. You know, a name could never be more clear than this one. T42 is a concept of a single T set. Like it's a one object, but it's a T set that wants to celebrate something very particular, which is the meeting of 2 people and a discussion that can come out of this. So it's a T set that has in one object two cups and one teapot. Very simple, very straightforward, kind of poetic, much more poetic than what we normally do, which is sort of like a, you know, pragmatic approach to everything. But I think it's also sort of like important to sometimes embrace things that lead to a pragmatism, which is, for instance, the discussion that you can have with someone. Now I get the sound. Swing is actually also like an object that is existing out there. I mean, a lot of the things that you do as a designer is to reenact and maybe rethink products that are out there. And the swing is actually a tray for serving, which comes from a patent that my partner who started the company with me holds in his family. It's a very old tray. It's a design that comes from, you know, Turkey. It's something that has been existing, that's been mostly used in the hospital context. And what we did was to sort of bring it back to another world and another set of issues, which is the simple one of domestic serving of drinks, having it like just right by your table, and then being able to do like things that you don't expect, like for instance, serving some drinks on your skateboard. It's, I should always travel with one, because if I had one, I could put like my drinks on it and I can do like a 360 and everything stays on the plate. And the reason for that is, and this is where pragmatism comes into play, it's all about physics. Everything that is within the triangle of the tray is actually completely stable. So you can like swing it around, like you can do whatever you want, it all stays in. It's quite unbelievable. You should check it out. So Accordion is another one of these like super compact ideas to answer a very basic problem, which is the one of like creating an impromptu table. So it's a trestle, and it sort of compacts itself or collapses into itself in a single stick. That makes it the most compact trestle that's out there. If you take a comparative trestle and you look at what it means to actually implement transportation to both, it's pretty striking. So the idea of it is sort of very basic. The result and the technology behind it is a little more demanding, and you can see in this video like what it actually meant to realize it. So again, the answer is super obvious. The technology behind it, even though low tech, it is kind of like really designed in a very conscious way. So rack is one of our newer products, which is like a coat rack. It has a sort of special feature, which is that you can organize your wardrobe in like 5 different spaces, so you can, in a way, be a little more organized. That's a little gift to you from us. But what's actually behind the division is related to the idea of compact living again, which means that if you look closely at these different legs, they're actually all of different sizes. And what that means is that they come together into one stick. So all these different elements that are composing the entire project is because of the idea that you should be able to carry it as a single stick. And then maybe to finish the product design side of my life, it's one of the last projects that I've done and that I've designed, which is a table. It's sort of like hybrid table because it's quite narrow, so it's a little more intimate than your average table. And the reason for that is that it actually is able to unfold into a ping pong table. Why is that something that matters? It's because it's a type of agenda that's a little less apprehended by design today, but is the one of both sort of like social connectivity within our homes, but also the one of health. Like if you play ping pong, you can actually burn more calories than if you're running. So it's something that, and everybody loves to play ping pong. I mean, I know you guys are basketball freaks, so am I, but ping pong is unbeatable in terms of like everybody just digs it. So I think it's a nice way to kind of bridge the idea of turning your home into a place for social interaction, and also a place to I guess to just improve your health, burn the calories of that burger you just ate. So moving on to, I guess, what is like most known from my side, what we're doing at JDS, and in many ways, I think I'll try to explain how much the work that we're doing at JDS is very linked to the one that we're doing at Makers of Agendas, because I really don't see any kind of difference in between the two. And I'll try to sort of go through a series of projects that we're doing or that we have done, which are, probably like you are unused to hear about them for the reasons that they were actually made for. And this is one of the things that where these kind of lectures matter, is to explain what are the thoughts behind what we're doing, and in that way there are different elements of investigation in the work that we do, and I'm gonna sort of go through like maybe 8 of them that are sort of like important in the office, and sort of exemplify them with work that you might know but that you might not have seen in that light. So one of the big issues that we are dealing with is, of course, to densify the build in our cities. Densification, and you guys in Manila know all about it because you've been like going through a tremendous expansion in the last few years. I've seen it because I've been here last time 3-4 years ago, and it's kind of scary how many new buildings are here. But as we do this densification of the build, we believe that it's very important that we also densify the unbuilt. That means that we work with public space. We do inject, as we densify and cater to more people, we also cater to their life, which hasn't a commercial value per se. So it's about trying to sort of approach that idea of space for people, simply. And one of the early projects that I've done, which deals with that, is a youth house in Copenhagen, which we did in 2004, which is a project that was, in order to provide spaces for the kids, and also for the kids to play, and where we managed to sort of entangle the idea of, actual program and sort of non-defined program into a single building. And it's quite funny when you go out there and if you ever go to Copenhagen, to like just pass by and spend a few hours there, where you see how the kids use the place, and which is the most important thing as an architect, is to really realize that they actually get it. They use it the way that we thought of it, which is that the outdoor spaces are just equally as important as the indoor spaces. And as we move towards other public spaces, we've been working again in Copenhagen on the, I don't know if I have like a pointer, maybe I don't, but like on the right side of the picture you see this little harbor bath, which was the first project that we built in 2003. And then on the left side of the harbor front, you see a much bigger project, and it's called the Calvable Waves, and it's an extension in the idea of dealing with public space of the previous project, but in a much bigger scale and a much more diverse programmatic purpose. And what happened was that basically the harbor front on the north side was completely neglected by the people of Copenhagen. Nobody was going there, and the reason why nobody was going there was very simple. There was no sun. You had these big buildings, and they were making like these shadows on the piers, and nobody could enjoy sun. And also they were, pretty ugly buildings. So what we did was to basically look into how could we bring in public space but make it attractive. And so we mapped all the shadows of the site, and then found out that if you wanted to do something interesting, you had to get out of the land and actually go on the water. And that's what happened. We just basically sort of like stretched the entire boardwalk and waterfront into the water. And we did so in a way that was both, just a place to hang out, a place to like sort of chill, sunbath, but also a place to have some sort of a programmatic intervention. So from the south side to like providing a sort of a sport sculpture that you can climb on, do different exercises on, and then moving on to a series of like sub-programs that became like really the reason why the place is active all year round. Because of course in the summer it's great, people go hang out, put their bikinis and just like sit there. But in the winter, it's a little more tough. For those of you who have been in Scandinavia, you would know that, we hardly ever get temperatures like this, so it's a little more demanding. So the reason why the whole project is actually splitting three-dimensionally is because we're looking into injecting different programs into that public space. So when you see these sort of spaces below, they are actually places for different programs to come in. And I'm going to get to that. So these are just pictures of the way that the place is being lived. And then you start seeing on the right side of the picture, these are different containers. And the idea was actually to bring back a historical condition of the harbor, which is that the harbor of Copenhagen used to be a production harbor. So it used to be about industry, containers, and this, of course, as in many cities in the world, has left the central city harbor and has migrated into, the outskirts of the city. And so we wanted to actually bring back these containers, not because we're nostalgic, but because they hold a certain flexibility and a certain capacity to change that we thought was very interesting for a place that is new and that we don't know yet what it should become. And so the project has become a place where, the first resident that came into using that complex as a company was a kayak club. So what they did was to basically insert themselves into one of these waves, and I'll show you somehow. I've been hiding this picture. Yeah, this one. So they've been placing themselves in a portion of the project where it was all prepared for them, and they have spaces for meeting for their members. They have a little shop where they sell ice creams and stuff in the summer, and then they have toilets, and of course they have the administration and the different sort of kayak, providing kayaks kind of function. And so that project is a project that is still evolving. Last week we had a state visit of the King and the Queen of Belgium to Denmark. They were visiting their their friends, the royal family of Denmark. So one thing they did is that they came around and they actually landed on our project, which meant that you had all these sort of camera crews hanging out there just to see their pretty, I don't know, not so fancy boat actually that they came with, but I was so surprised about that. In the foreground you can see that there's a sort of floating island. That's one of the parts of the project where the kayak actually use that place to load and offload kids' kayaks. And so this sort of program that relates to water is something that we've been very busy with at the office. We've been, in a way, in a weird way, we've been, not knowingly, but we've been involved with a lot of projects that deal with waterfront. This is another sea bath in southern Denmark, in the city of Faaborg, which I'm not going to give you a full sort of description of, but it's just to outline the fact that it is a sort of behavior that cities have lately towards development. And then bridging from this sort of smaller scale behavior to a much more urban scale is a project that we've been doing in response or in inspiration from the Oslo Opera in Norway, where we've been engaging with the city of Caen in France. It's a small city. It's a big history during the World War II. It's a place where you have this kind of landscape, and what we were asked to do was actually to make a full master plan for the inner city island, which is completely underdeveloped today and needs to be rethought. And it's right in the center of the city. It's surrounded by water. And what we proposed was to actually try to reenact the sort of simplicity of the landscape that these guys have locally, and sort of place it into that condition where you almost can't see anything, but it's basically the entire island. Oh, no, it's better. the entire island in the center. So if you imagine that the city is 360 all around that place, and it's not like it's basically having its center as a vacuum. It's like nothing is happening there. Very recently, OMA opened up this this cross building at the bottom of the screen, which is a library, and we knew about the project when we did this one. So it's a response to that condition. But the idea was to really kind of look at urbanism of almost in an inverted kind of way, where we basically, as architect planners, we dictate or establish the rules for everything that is happening on the roof of the buildings. So what we're doing is we're setting up a new datum, which is the one of the way that the building will end, not the way that the different buildings will look like, who are the architects of the different buildings, but what we set is a series of rules that make them obliged to comply to on the top of their building. So it's actually an open master plan to do anything they want below, within reason, let's say, and then having to connect to a network of public spaces on the top. So if you look at it from top down, it's actually a pretty standard master plan in many ways. Different buildings spread around, cut by different streets. But if you look at it in the way that it sort of behaves in urbanity, it actually ensures something that is quite impossible to do in normal urban planning, which is the idea of conquering the entire ground that you have for public space, still allowing for commercial development to occur in the same instance. So it's in a way it's sort of like an inverted urbanism. It's kind of a novel approach to urbanism. Of course, because of that, we completely lost the competition, and it was a little too radical for the city. But I still think that it's a project that is worth discussing, because it proposes something that is maybe a little more open-ended and a little more driven towards the citizens of the place than driven towards only the investors, although it still deals with the reality of commercial entrepreneurial behavior. So yeah. And so this kind of approach has been in the practice for a while, and one project that you know that I'm sure that we've been doing before JDS existed was from my first company, Plot. The Harbor Bath was also from Plot. The Maritime Youth House was also from Plot. These buildings. But what I want to outline about this one is like something that is quite unique and important in my career today, which is that it's the idea of combining actually architecture with the tremendous expense from society on infrastructure. And so this is like a single building that was planned to be a parking house and a separate potential housing building in the outskirts of Copenhagen, where we basically went in and proposed to the city, because the client was not interested in doing any parking house, they were only interested in doing housing. We proposed the city that we could combine the parking program and the housing program into a single entity, so that you would spend money on infrastructure but actually pay for foundation of architecture. And this is something that, so it's called the Mountain. And this is something that is like a little, like a sort of not so small, but like a building size example of a behavior and a sort of like approach to architecture that I've been developing ever since at the office. And in one of the projects that this approach has been more extreme and definitely more radical is a project in in Shenzhen. So we were asked in 2007 to do a 3 million square meter project in the city of Shenzhen. You guys probably know where it is, but like Shenzhen is basically right next to Hong Kong. It's, you know, mainland China, sort of benefiting from the Hong Kong relationship, but also having a tremendous sort of like growth condition to deal with. And one of the key factors of that growth, or that the insanity of that growth that you can sense, is coming from the brief itself, where the client said first that it should be 666 meters tall, and then they came back a month after and they said actually it should be 888 meters tall, and then a month back again it should finally be, you know, 1,111 meters tall. And so we definitely knew that we were in China. We definitely knew that we were in a place where, you know, numbers matter, and somehow, I guess, people's lives don't matter so much. And then, you know, the cherry on top was that I also had to be feng shui, which I knew nothing about back then. So I had to sort of like take a crash course. But the startup of the project was really coming from this map, and, you know, just realizing the geography of the place, and then diving into it and actually understanding that what was fascinating and sort of horrifying about that place was that, you know, urbanity had been exponentially rising, but not in the same way as it had in Hong Kong. It had done that to the detriment of nature. And so if you look at maps from 20 years back, and, you know, at the time of the project, urbanity had been like literally sort of taken over nature in a very aggressive way. While, you know, as we know, Hong Kong has been, you know, a super populated, like very, like, you know, a growing place, but also in a much more sort of obedient way to the power of nature. So topography has prevailed in Hong Kong, while if you look at the Shenzhen, it's actually quite shocking to see that this is, you know, a view where today this one hill that you see in the picture has been taken out, so it's flattened. And all this development that you see was made on a series of very kind of dramatic topography that was taken out again. So it's like what we were trying to sort of bring into our project in this kind of hyperdensity momentum that the client was asking for, was the mentality of Hong Kong in a way to sort of try to create a hybrid of density and nature in a sort of a single strike. And I can tell you it was a very difficult project. We did like, you know, hundreds of options. Nothing worked out until we sort of like stepped out of our mindset and stopped looking at the project as a tower. That this project was not about doing a tower, it was actually about doing a city. It was about creating, I mean, embracing the fact that we were going to do 3 million square meters of a single building. This is not just a tower, it's actually way more than that. If you think of the Chicago Spear that was happening at the same time, it was like a fifth of the size of this project. And, you know, they didn't manage to do it, by the way. So this was a very big challenge. And it only kind of came to life when, one night, like I was in my place and at home, and I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about a stupid project that I couldn't like get an answer from. And then I had this idea of actually creating this city rather than you know, a tower. And then I had nothing at home, of course, to do anything about it. I just had like sheets of papers and a stapler. And so I made this model, which was, you know, the sort of kickoff of the entire project in a way for us, was to realize that it was not about a series of floors stacked on top of each other. It was actually about a series of neighborhoods. So it was about, in a way, emptiness and public space combined with commercial and living spaces. And so we started exploring that idea and actually making, turning that sort of simple model into a project and into plans and sections. And one of the funny things was that, like, if you see this is like a standard sort of floor plan, where you see that the pink is all the housing, all the blue is commercial and office spaces, the yellow is circulation, and all the green slash gray is public space. So there's a lot of public space in there. And when you, in that very picture, you actually take out all the program, you get this sort of a Mies van der Rohe column, which was like a funny found object that we had no clue about, of course. But what's interesting about a project is when you start looking at it in section, and obviously in a three-dimensional way, and you start understanding that these spaces that are, huge, they also supply a huge amount of program and make it possible for people to have a life at, 600, 800, 1,000 meter of height, which is not the life that you have in a tower. And the life of a tower can be summarized in a very simple way. You're in your spot, you take an elevator, go all the way down to the lobby, and then get out on the street. That's what a tower is like. So in this case, it's a totally different mentality. You get out of your office space or your house, you walk into public space, you can walk your dog, you can smoke a cigarette, you can hang out, and then, eventually, if you ever need to, you can go back down on the ground floor. So this was the insanity of the project that we proposed. There's a lot of aspects to that project I'm not going to tell you about, but what was really interesting about it, it was to sort of like one of these moments where you understand that maybe you completely misunderstood the brief and what people asked you, and that is also because they never really thought it through in a way that they actually knew what they were up to do. And this is a thing that's, again, like an advice, for your architects, is don't ever take your brief for granted. Actually always criticize and challenge the brief that you're being given. And so jumping from this huge scale, I want to talk about like a very small project which matters a lot to us and also matters a lot to doing bigger projects. And this is it's actually a bench. I was asked by a Norwegian supplier to create a bench for their line of furniture, public furniture. And I'm not okay, so I grew up as a skater, so I spent a lot of time on the streets. And benches is something that I used to have a relationship to, which was of, misuse and abuse, and definitely not a passive relationship with. So when I was asked to do a bench, I was thinking, okay, what other sort of conditions, apart from the one that I'm very close to, what other condition can I think of that are important in terms of a small attribute in public space? And then I just sort of like, I have this, I guess you all know this image from Art Ken, taken in Harlem, shooting like all the biggest jazz players in the world. That one day, I think it's called a day in Harlem, and all the big guys out there, and where they're standing is they're basically standing on what is called a stoop. The stoop is these few steps that you get, in the US a lot, these few steps rising into the main floor of a house, and that have become, especially in sort of deprived neighborhoods, as like public spaces, that is the place where people hang out and talk all day. If you saw the movie Do the Right Thing, I think the half of the movie is happening on a stoop. So I was kind of like thinking of the project as a way to sort of merge my skater kind of experience with benches and the one of this picture. And so what we did was a sort of like slightly bigger bench, like it's called stoop, obviously. We don't have to reinvent everything. But it's like a sort of mini auditorium or a big bench. It's like a hybrid furniture that basically provides a series of potential uses, and it's very interesting to like. So I have like 5 of these benches. That was part of my contract deal that I made with the company. And so I've been using these benches and try them when I could. And so I placed them on a square in Brussels illegally at night with a friend of mine and a few friends of mine, because these idiotic benches are pretty heavy. You need 6 people to move them. So we went at night and put them there on the square very close to the office. And it was just like to sort of start recording, the way that these benches sort of behave in the city, and how, people end up sort of having stories from these benches. This is a Russian girl that was visiting Brussels that ended up like meeting these 2 Italian dudes and having like a good weekend in Brussels. So, we sort of like interviewed them about their story. It's kind of cute. And so the work that we do, regardless of scale, is really something that tries to sort of engage with urbanity and urban issues. And sometimes, actually, what is before us in a project starts to dictate what we do. And this is what happened in this project in Hangzhou, in China, where we were part of a sort of huge development. You can see a lot of extremely boring, kind of like repetitive buildings. I have no clue who's doing them, and I don't care. But what I cared about was these few lower buildings that you see. There were existing warehouses, different like market halls that were used historically for market purposes. There was a food market, the one in the middle, and there was a public square on the sort of bottom center. And so what happened was that we were asked to do a building right in the middle of all this, and frankly it was kind of frightening, because if you would just do what they would ask you to do, the relationship between these 2 public spaces that were historically very strong would be completely killed, because basically what the client wanted us to do this. And so we sort of like worked our way up from this to managing to basically engage with history and the client's needs in a sort of like way to, it's supposed to sort of like make the 2 ends meet. And the first move was to sort of like convince them that they would have a benefit in using a passage through their building. So not only to reenact the historical condition that was like, for us very important, but also in order to like create a certain flow through the buildings and allow them to get more people to actually engage with the ground floor, which was a commercial space. So that was a plus for them. And then we basically sort of kept on manipulating that void and the idea of creating voids into that mass in order to create a series of different benefits for the company. This is a headquarter for an internet company in China. So, pretty sort of rational people. And what they wanted was basically a really good place for the executive offices to have to spend time. These guys like they spend hours, and I mean they work over hours all the time. So to have like a place where they could hang out, and this is how we created that sort of a tip portion of the building where we injected the idea of these sort of like vertical gardens that would like step down and would become a sort of rice field condition, and also collect water for the building, and so that you could actually turn the entire project into a sort of nearly sustainable or self-sufficient place. And so this was the competition, and then slowly, we won the competition, and slowly we got into building the project. And one thing that is like also very interesting about the sort of new world we live in is like if you take this picture, I mean I don't know how much you can see it, but like the 2 youngest people on the picture are basically our client and us. Like everybody else is like older guys that, although I know Asians you can never tell their age, but I know for the record that they were older. So the building like finally happened with a lot of issues with. Is that means that my time is up or? Oh, so okay. So I'll try to speed it up. So the building is currently, I mean, it's just finished about a year ago, and it's still sort of like taking its ground. You can see that there's a lot of landscape that is still happening around the building. But so it has this sort of approach, and you can clearly see in that picture that sort of diagonal cut like links straight into the space that was like this historical market, which is like has been reenacted as the same program today. So another thing that I think really matters, and maybe maybe not so much in a city like Manila, but I think eventually it will, is like the idea of building. In Europe we have very old cities, and like somehow we have to deal with that condition, and I think it's not at all like a burden. It's actually a potential for like creating new typologies. So one of the things that we've been involved with was to engage with different projects. From this one in a very large scale in the city of Brussels is to actually make a proposal for the Justice Palace. Excuse me, but I'm getting like. So the Justice Palace of Brussels was up for a sort of an open ID competition. What you probably don't know, but should know, is that this building is, when it was built in 1886, it was the biggest building ever built in the world. They sort of eradicated an entire neighborhood to build that building. So there's a huge historical burden with that building. People in the local communities really have an issue with it. It's a building that kind of took over people's lives. So when we were asked to do an ideas competition, like a concept competition for it, we decided to actually take, beyond the people, take like the planet as a topic to address the idea of justice. And so we decided to actually enforce the justice program on the building by saying that it would become the palace of global justice, meaning that it would be a justice palace that would actually engage as its sole program and sole core direction issues of sustainability and environment. So instead of like becoming this place where any cases would happen, it would just strictly focus, but on a global scale, on all issues that address the planet. And we thought it was actually a sort of like, in a way, like opportunist behavior, because the building is so big that it can only survive by becoming something of a global dimension. As right now the city is thinking of like selling like most of it to shopping malls, to become like a stupid shopping mall in downtown Brussels. It's like completely insane. So the only way out of that banality is to actually address real issues, and by that address bigger issues. And so this proposition actually stands as of today, as and we will approach sort of politicians about it now that we know that it's becoming more and more of an issue back home, that they should sort of go beyond their sort of like little kind of microcosm and think for immediate profit, and actually think about the kind of impact that this such a project can have on society. And of course, I mean, the actual architecture is like I mean I want to say almost like a joke. Split the globe in all these portions and create like this sort of globe, like inverted globe kind of condition. But it's also just a tool to address a topic, to bring up a discussion. Where we get a little more into the sort of nitty-gritty of realizing the idea of building the city on the city was in this very small project in Copenhagen, where I always like to sort of point at some of the basics of architecture. I mean, you guys know about this if you're good students or architects. But one of the things that's kind of interesting about the 5 points of architecture of Le Corbusier is the roof garden, which is one of the ones that somehow has been sort of, I would say, neglected, because it feels like it's not maybe as necessary. But I mean, history tells us that it has become a much bigger need and a much bigger also demand for people to deal with it. So we've been focusing on that issue a lot in our work, and you see all our projects are always having the roof as a dimension that's very thought through. But this was an insanely small project in downtown Copenhagen, where we had just basically a few square meters to create 3 apartments. That was the request, and what we told our client was to basically, instead of just doing the apartments, they should also approach what they're missing there, which is obviously their garden. You can see that this block is like a sort of an urban remain from different sort of street cutouts, and so you don't have any space left. And so what we proposed was to bring back the idea of a park onto the rooftop, while we were anyway going to build those roofs new anyway, so we had to use it in some kind of way. So the idea went from sort of taking that condition, which is a typical Copenhagen rooftop, to creating apartments that were right on the edge of the city, and then to the ability of going up and creating a whole new sort of datum overlooking Copenhagen in a very sort of peaceful way, because you're just above the roof, so you only have a sort of an idea of the horizon of Copenhagen, which is and actually it's not a dramatic skyline in any kind of way, but it is a beautiful skyline. The logo of Copenhagen is spears on a canal, and that's the idea of Copenhagen is basically that nothing really stands out except from the historical spears, and then the presence of the water in the city. And so this is actually something that you really kind of experience when you go there. And then moving on from there to sort of a project that has a lot of resonance in our work, but also a lot of that holds a lot of misunderstanding, is a project of the ski jump in Oslo, where you really, I mean, this was about sort of creating the national icon of a country. The whole idea, I mean, it's coming from way back in time. The place has been modified over 20 times. It's it's in the psychology of Norwegians, who are basically ski jumping freaks, and it's the equivalent of creating a sort of Eiffel Tower, for Norwegians. And so what we were, Danish-Belgian kind of office, reinvent this mecca of ski jumping, when you know that all the leaders, historical and current leaders of the profession, on the sport, are Norwegians, and if I'm Danish, which I'm not, by the way, but if I'm thought to be as Danish, Denmark has very little to offer in ski jumping, and Belgium has basically nothing to offer at all in skiing. So I went up to Zaha and looked at her track record in ski jumps, because I mean, she's probably the only one who has actually done a ski jump that anybody has talked about ever. So I was wondering, what kind of approach did she manage to bring into the question? And looking into it, I mean, I didn't really come up with anything better than this. There's something about that condition that just didn't make any sense. And so when I presented the project to the city of Oslo, I basically presented that, and I told them, this is not about whether we are Norwegian enough to do a ski jump. is not about us being too young to do any project. It's really about your problems. And we broke it down in a very kind of pragmatic way, which was to look at the issue of ski jumping and what it really means to embrace that sort of somewhat insane discipline. You know, these people are like flying 150 meters in the air. I mean, it's kind of there is a sort of like risk of death. So you have to like be quite rational and structured about it. And so what we looked at was, you know, the conditions, the climate condition in Holmenkollen are terrible. There's a lot of wind, you're on top of a hill, you need to deal with that. And skiers have been complaining over years about the dangers of ski jumping in Holmenkollen, and there has been quite a few accidents. So the one thing that we started looking into is how to make the place safer. And then obviously as an architect you always look at how could you like take, you know, one issue and translate it into answering another issue, because you're always dealing with very limited budgets basically. And so what we found out was actually that the issue of wind protection and the issue of structure were very close together. Like we needed some thickness to create wind protection, but we also needed some thickness to create a structure. And this is, by the way, the longest cantilever in the world, which, of course, everybody thinks it's insane, but in fact is the only way that we could do this project on budget and on time. Why? Because if you build in steel, if you make a cantilever like that, I mean, you guys who are good students and architects, right? You know that if you make a cantilever, you actually lighten the structure of the lower part of the beam. So by letting the weight of the cantilever take down the structure of the lower part of the beam, we managed to cut down 1/3 of the steel amount, which means in a project like this 1/3 of the cost, which also means that we could work with a much more robust construction site with less impact on the environment, because we don't have a third leg that's sort of like taking on the ground. So we just saved a lot of money and a lot of time. And then the only thing that we wanted to squeeze into the project was basically the idea of this public square on the top, where you have a new understanding of what the ski jump is about, which is actually not about the Eiffel Tower, but it's about understanding what Oslo is and how could you best experience it. So when people, so this is a public space now that you can go up to and experience the entire region, and I'll show you some pictures. But first, you know, the opening championship, 50,000 people in the arena. I mean, that's another thing that people don't know so much about the ski jump, is that the ski jump design that you know is, you know, the tip of the iceberg. Is actually a huge project in the bottom, and a lot more kind of down-to-earth project. I've been told once that the ski jump looked like a long chair for God, and you guys know something about God. So I was, you know, kind of curious about that. So I started Googling, and then I didn't find anything but like a long chair for Adam. I think it looks pretty comfy. But actually, in many ways, like, because I'm interested in the project being more than just the ski jump itself, but being the entire arena, I always sort of talk about it as this giant Chinese spoon. Because it really is the same proportion. It's like, you know, it fits right in there. I think we should actually make a model of the ski jump on the scale of a Chinese spoon and then fit it in, because I'm pretty sure it would fit perfectly. But what's funny about this project is also another thing that a lot of people don't know is its relationship to its environment. I mean, this is really sort of like a Loch Ness monster coming out in a sort of sea of you know, single-family wooden houses in the countryside of Oslo, which is kind of like a weird condition to be in. But as I was saying, what matters is actually the few square meters, about 100 square meter up there, and where you can see from there the entire region. So this is the fjord of Oslo that you see in the background, where you basically, from which you can see, the whole city. You can see the opera, you can see everything. I mean, it's really a striking place. Should I stop, or what's the deal with the time? Anybody of the people? I can continue? Oh, okay. Well, you can throw tomatoes, So always an option. So, like, one of the things that we work a lot with in the office is, evil developers. Like, basically, just working with, commercially interested developers, and trying to sort of address their interest, and the one that we of course have as architects, which is to sort of try to engage with society and give something to society. Obviously, architecture lasts. A building will be there for maybe not so much in Asia, but back in Europe, but 50 years is a good average. Could be longer. Hopefully, some of our stuff could last longer, but. So when we engage with these sort of like very kind of fast money interest projects, we try to combine that need, because they pay the bill, and also the one of trying to kind of create a better place for the cities that we involve ourselves in. And one of the projects that has been like tremendously significant to the practice is called the Iceberg. It was important because it started with this master plan in the outskirts of. It's quite central in Aarhus, the second city of Denmark, but it's like facing the sea on reclaimed land, and the demand was to create this kind of urban block where basically nobody has any relationship to the sea except for the one facade that is looking at it. So what we proposed was somehow. Basic, but kind of radical in a way that it was illegal. Like, we basically proposed to the planners that we screwed their master plan, and we would rethink it so that we could create a building that is, going beyond the set height limits, and breaks down the entire configuration of the block so that everybody in the block would have a relationship to the sea, but even like beyond that, the people to come after us, the neighbors to become behind us, that have definitely zero relationship and benefit from the seaside, would also manage to get a glimpse of it. And this was like a quite risky take, because this was a competition. We were bidding together with our client. So our client had the intelligence to take that risk as well. And then, to everybody's surprise, we actually won the project. So this is what we proposed versus, the block that you saw before. And this is also exactly what we ended up building. This is a picture of the competition scheme, where we take a render from the furthest away building looking out to the sea. And this is a sort of similar picture from the furthest away building when it was built, looking out to the sea. Actually, the build one is better. You can see a lot more sea. So maybe it was the photographer's angle, I don't know. But so the project is sort of a hybrid of, hyper commercial approach and like our interest in creating sort of a neighborhood and public space that would outlive, the developers' profits. This is a few pictures in the condition that it is today in. Oh yeah, and so, we won the MIPIM award for this project, and I'm only talking about it because, MIPIM sucks. So, I don't know if you guys know about MIPIM awards, They are terrible awards. It's only commercially driven. Most evil projects and architects win all the time. It's very rare that something with a good intention actually get a MIPIM award. So we were kind of proud of that. Also a little bit like scared of becoming, you know, like commodified. But so we did a video. I hope it's gonna play. It's got good music too, but it's not playing. I mean, we made it with drones. Okay, anyway, you can go check it out on our website. Hey, what can I do? It's your computer. No, but it is on the website. You can definitely go check it out. It's fun. Very good track from a Danish musician friend of mine. So, as we so am I okay now? Still, you guys? Yeah? Okay, I think I can wrap it up in like maybe 5 minutes. Okay? All right. If you don't say no, I'll keep on. You know? So this is a project that matters to us a lot because actually it is about sort of like engaging with something very rare in architecture. Is engaging with different publics, different ages. I mean, basically embracing really society in a way. This is a program, it's also a competition, and it's a project that will be about putting together a kindergarten, a youth house, and a business incubator. So if you break it down in ages, it's pretty much like 3 different ages of mankind, but putting those together under one roof. And you know, that was the brief, was to sort of deal with those 3 programs. What we decided to do was to basically try to actually make a single building for these 3 different programs, but unifying them around something that is not a building, which is a public space and a garden where they would actually interact beyond the different interaction that they have within the building itself. And so by doing that, we also wanted the building to engage with its surroundings, and so that the different programs, they get their own sort of dedicated public spaces, so they engage with urbanity in specific ways, although together they become a sort of single unit almost. And so that project was really sort of about this, and you can see, you know, design through model making. It was really about sort of surrounding that idea of the patio and becoming like the central of gravity of the entire project. And so these were like all the sort of like competition phase visuals. And then when we finally won the project, it took quite a bit of time to get through actually reframing everything so that the actual users that are going to be there will engage with the project after the competition and give us you know, a little bit of a teaching on what do their program really mean and how could they really function together. So that sort of became, you know, the sort of approach of the entire design process, which, you know, I think was probably one of the most exciting ones that I've ever been through, is to get all these different administrations and peoples to like combine their interests and their ideas into a single building. This is the lobby entrance, cafe, restaurant, where you can see like always sort of the relationship to the courtyard. Sort of like main staircase going into the incubator part, looking down at the restaurant. This is a sort of, again, main staircase going into the kindergarten, which is a kindergarten that's like very 3-dimensional, which is also quite unusual. So it's like believing in, you know, kids having to you know, climb and like be more, you know, three-dimensional. I don't know how to say that, but like really kind of going into these different staircases which have different speeds. Some of them are very slow, some of them are steeper. Back in downstairs, the kitchen, the way that the kitchen thickens into a space of hanging out. Like how we carved out some of the programs to create common spaces here for the students. So this is in the ground floor of the youth hostel. In the courtyard. Looking at the youth hostel, so the youth hostel is also like, it's one of these places that is almost like the forced hotel in a way. It's totally not in terms of the cost, but it's like one of these places where the kids have like big terraces and they can really hang out. Let's see if this video is gonna work now. Man. Okay, well, you get the soundtrack, but this one is not as good though. Okay, too bad. Okay, but I think I'll stop on this. Thank you guys.
An architecture student from CSB. So I noticed that the nature of your work requires a lot of complex problem solving. So I wanted to know, in terms of your process, what happens when you hit a wall or when there's a problem you can't seem to solve? Is there some kind of framework you go back to? Do you retrace your steps, or do you more or less aggressively go at it until the solution presents itself? Yeah.
We have been finding solutions, but it's true that when you deal with time, I mean, the problem is always time. You know, when you don't have the time to actually find the right solution. There's something about like designing in the world of architecture, which I think is beautiful, is that you know, whether you like it or not, our profession is slow. So it's a condition that allows you to sort of jump back into like considering again issues that you thought you might have resolved. Like for instance, you know, I've done sometimes projects where I actually accept that I know I don't have the right answer in the design phase, and then I sort of like do a few tricks. So for instance, like I know that I would please the jury and I would win and then they would think that they would get that project, but then I reopen everything again when we get a contract and I start the design process from scratch because I knew that I didn't have the right answer. But you know, this is not the best way. I mean, don't take that as a learning. It's not smart to do, but it happens. It's kind of extreme. I think the best is just, you know, for sure we are. You work as a team, so there's a lot of people involved. In the design process, what we're trying to push forward is that everybody, like when we hit a crisis and we really have an issue where we don't have an answer, we try to put all the intelligence of the office into that specific problematic. Also because then we get like some feedback from people who are maybe not involved in the process and will have like a different way to take it. And then afterwards you just have to clean up the mess and like find the right, you know, decision. But that's another way to go at it. But you know, it's a difficult question. I mean, of course sometimes you hit a wall. And I mean, it's sort of stupid and classic to say, but like then you should also be open to start from scratch. Like not be like too sort of engaged in your ideas and your like what you have put forward so far, but maybe like take it all out and then start again. And you know, so far it's always been like possible to jump back into a solution. But yeah, good luck.
Thank you. Oh wait, just one more question.
You can. There's a book coming out in July. You can check it out. Everything is in there. All the dirty stories.
Oh. Oh wow.
You're gonna like it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for. I'm from Shelter Magazine. I would just like to ask. It seems that your projects are informed by a certain political and social consciousness to it. And I was wondering, how do you engage with clients? How do you find the right projects that is informed by, that would match, that would fit your political and social consciousness, where you could apply the social ideas that you have in mind?
I mean, we really try. I mean, we almost never have conscious clients. We always have, you know, difficult commercial kind of personal clients that we try to, I suppose, convert towards, you know, caring about the world and not only themselves. So I think it's, in a way, it's probably more challenging, but also a little more fun and definitely more meaningful to do that. I mean, if I had the choice, you know, I don't know if I would be lazy or get bored, but you know, it's, you just simply don't have that choice. Like, you don't pick your client, and that's the thing about being an architect. That you know, the political level that we engage ourselves in, it's, you know, all architects want to claim that they're not politicized, but truly every act we make is a political stand. We just have to, you know, follow it through in a way. And I think I mean, it starts with commercial clients. To be engaged with commercial clients, I mean, this has been more than 50% of my practice. And I think it's really important to maintain that, because it's, you know, when I drive around Manila, I'm like pretty shocked by what has happened the past 3 years. And that is commercial strictly. And it's not that good, you know. So it's like really important to really engage with that. I mean, that we don't end up building cities, all cities, that are just, you know, a kind of copy-paste of some garbage that was made in the US or whatever. You know, it's like we have to be better than that. Also, like, every place has its own history and its own conditions and its own needs, and we need to go beyond the, you know, the replica. And I think it's difficult these days because people are, you know, hungry for fast results. They think, which is, I believe really is a misunderstanding. They think that known models will be more successful than new models. I think it's a complete wrong approach. If you take, you know, the Mountain and VM, the buildings that we've done, the earlier commercial project we've done in Copenhagen, the client that we had there, Parian, is a developer, very greedy one. His project before our project was a similar scale project, much closer to the city center of Copenhagen, much better location, and you know, in developer terms, location, location, location. That's the thing that matters the most. He couldn't sell any apartments there because he did shitty architecture. And then he, in a desperate take, he hired us. You know, we were kids, we hadn't built anything, but you know, we made sense to him. So he tried us out. On the first day of sale, he sold 100 apartments. That's half the project on day one Sunday. And he had 200 apartments unsold close to the city center. So, you know, it's like we really have something to bring to the table as architects. And we really have to convince people to go beyond the known models, the classical models, and actually create novelty. And that's, you know, that's one of the biggest challenges. But we don't choose our clients, you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
to ask, how does Lina Bobardi's work influence yours? And are you concerned about materiality in the work?
Yes. So, as much as I mean, I think maybe like she influences the work in a way as a sort of like an ideal to try to aim at for a time where that is impossible. You know, I think it's you get closer to a result if you aim further away than if you just like take in what's available to you and given to you. So I mean, I think that the sort of like, I mean, she represents the most kind of hardcore version of brutalist architectural approach I can think of. You guys have actually a pretty good guy here also, but I think she's like beyond all the radicals in terms of, and you know, including Zumthor, because it's coming out of a truth and truthful kind of social implication into the communities, what she's been doing. And so it's both a model or like a reminder of where we can go as architects, but also where we can go as thinkers of society. Not only, you know, the materiality of it, but where did that come from, and the truthfulness that it provided for a place that had, you know, little means, little technology, and, you know, basically created an extremely lively social impact. So it's both material but also very much conceptual, my interest in Lina. She's the best.
Next question. Rich, and I'm a young student, and I was amazed of your architecture. That was mind-blowing, insane playground, dystopian, utopian architecture, and I was taking many lectures about architecture and some building codes and concerns about architecture. Do you concern the safety and security? Because I seen a roof structure and people were standing there, and when rain comes, there were, I don't know what will come after the result of the rain, and I was thinking about your manipulative architecture, and what is your advocacy, or what are your advocacies in building this playground architecture? Sorry for sarcasm, but
No, but okay, so let me just put it simply. The buildings are built, you know, so they've gone through all the checks that they need to go through to be okay legally. I mean, I don't know how it goes down here in Philippines, but back in the different places where I work, it's kind of difficult to get to the level of building without being overly checked, and everything is compliant to rules, and you know, it's I mean, you can always jump off, but you really have to want to, you know. It's not my problem anymore. I mean, I'm sorry if you do, but hey, you know. But I think you have to. I mean, it's definitely pointing at a very important part of our work, which is, you know, maybe like if you start studying architecture, you get a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of regulation, and it's sort of like, it makes you think like it's narrowing down your vision, right? I mean, you're starting to feel like, shit, this is actually a shitty job that I chose, because I can't do anything, right? I mean, I get it. It's, you know, I've been there. But eventually, you just have to find a way to flip things around. I mean, there are ways to, you know, rules are made in order to like be bended, you know, broken. Not that you should allow for insanity to occur, but you know, sometimes we have managed in our practice to change the law. Like in France, we changed the law in order to build 130 square meter house. We actually changed the law. It was the project I was going to show after the one that I showed last. And it's an interesting condition where you understand that maybe the regulations are not all that sensible after all. That, you know, regulations are also there to limit your capacity as a people to do something. And sometimes they need to be really broken. And that's called progress. That's when you move up in, you know, like you actually make things more livable for us. And unfortunately, I mean, the political stand in the world today is maybe less sort of open to that kind of approach, which is therefore even more important that you go beyond the regulations, that you push the boundaries as a student, that you don't give up, that you like really attack those givens, and that you tell people no, you know, it's not right to do this that way because it could be so much cooler to do it another way. And then you make it proven that it is in fact the case, that you do have better solution. And that's, I mean, that's the big challenge that we work with every day. That's why, you know, it's a tough job also. It's because it's not only that you want to innovate. I mean, that's why I say that I have zero interest in you know, formal, like, you know, I couldn't care less about Zaha Hadid or people like that, because they basically represent architecture that is formal experimentation, which I think is no value. It's a personal thing. I don't care about my person, I care about society. So therefore I get engaged with those nitty-gritty issues like you mentioned, rules, and try to bend them to improve society. But, you know, it's much less sexy, but it's much more important. I mean, it is important versus the rest, which is basically bollocks. So, yeah, you know, just don't give up the fight. I mean, it's really something you need to go beyond these restrictions that you think are, you know, entangling your creative capacity. Instead, you know your enemy. I mean, you have to know and really like engage with them and know them so that you can go beyond them. That's the only way. I mean, so good luck.
I'm a practicing architect. I'm just wondering, how do you convince clients to buy into your ideas? Especially most clients, developers, they are primarily concerned on profit and cost.
Please rewind. Yeah, I mean, I think the best way is to convince them that they will make more money. Which is in fact what has happened in all the projects that I've done, commercial projects, is that the guys, it's sort of like, it's a bit like this kind of insane situation that they fall into with, like they dare to contact us, then they dare to listen to us, then they dare to get, you know, excited by what we're selling, and then they're there to believe that it's going to make them more money. And of course, there you hook them, because when you can prove that it's actually more profitable to do something good, of course they're in 100%. And the thing is, like, this is one of the basic problems of our profession, is that there's a huge disparity and misunderstanding and sort of like a mind-boggling condition in between what we, all of us people, care about, and we're the buyers, so we're the guys making the money for the developer, right? I mean, we're buying the apartments, they make the money on them. It's basic. So we care about stuff. The developers, they don't sort of get that, you know. It's somehow like they're almost not human, you know. And because they have this thing that they only care about what they've done before, or their friend, idiot did before there, you know. And then it's sort of like you spend your time reminding these people that they're making houses for humans, you know, like that is actually good to have light and, you know, a balcony and cross ventilation, you know, natural ventilation, and you tell them all that, you're thinking like, this is granted. It's like, they just forgot about it. Somehow in the scope of their career, they forgot that it was important. So the thing is, because there's so much insistence on style and formal approaches and names today, some developers take that beyond the basic needs, the basic desires that we have as consumers, you know. And I mean, I hate consuming, by the way, but one thing that I want to consume of a lot is space, light, air, view, you know, just basic stuff. I don't give a shit about kitchen XYZ or some kind of aircon bullshit. I don't want this stuff. I just want the basics, you know. And I think most of us do, actually. But developers seems to have, you know, lost that perspective. So the big task is to convince them that going backwards is actually moving forward and making more profit along the way. Sorry.
Alright, any more questions?
I'm Baron Duran and I'm an architecture student from DLSCB. Here in the Philippines...
Oxford, you mean?
Oh, it's just my shirt. So, in the Philippines, we are being taught on how to preserve and take value in our culture and heritage, especially in Manila, because it's a city, as you know. So you have said before that you have been in Manila for quite a few years ago, compared to... So here's my question: if there is, in your honest opinion, do you think that Manila can still be saved and redeemed to its original status? Like before, it was very, but now before you have said it's now full of commercial spaces and other irrelevant areas. So I think that Manila can redeem its original glory.
Yeah, I mean, to find is the Manila model. What is the Manila way? You know, what is the local approach to doing things? And I think what Manila is suffering from is the disease of copy pasting. I mean, it's a big issue, and I'm a very sort of external reader of what's going on, and in a way I'm probably like very wrong, but you know, it feels a little too much like the country or the city is going in a direction which is not sustainable, and I mean that in a local way. It's very much like an application of another model. I see way more cars, bigger cars. I see, you know, buildings called the City of Dreams, and it's a parking lot. Shit like that is scary. It's like not right, okay? But I'm also convinced that, you know, when I talk to locals, they're also not happy about it. So somehow there has to be a way to get out of that. Very much in you know, it's a big challenge. And I also don't know where it comes from. I don't know enough. I mean, I'm about to start a project in Manila, so you know, maybe I'll learn a lot, and hopefully I'll come up with some good ideas. But it's impossible to answer. But don't go back. I mean, learn from what was there, what is valued. Just move forward. don't go back, but skip the crap that is going on now. That's for sure. I mean, what I think anyway.
Different approaches to different problems. However, I hope that it won't offend you somehow. I've noticed some shapes and forms that are particularly like a brand of your, maybe it's part of your design brand or how you really think. Is it really inevitable to somehow have this certain style, and do you see yourself evolving from that later on as you progress in your career? Also, another question is, have you encountered, because I'm also a practicing architect, have you encountered being compared to a certain architect that, oh, you seem to have a similar style in your design? How do you deal with that?
So we have more than 400 projects done that we've been working on. So I think you probably know at best 10% of that, at best. So in a way, you know, my style is that you think, you know, is not really, it's, you only know 10%. So I could still surprise you. And maybe I should actually think about that when I give lectures. So I should, you know, focus on things that people don't know about what we do. So they would step out of that comfort zone, you know. But there's another thing that I want to say about style is that I have zero interest in style, and the idea of, like you would say, it sounded like you meant that would I progress by stepping out of that at some point, is something that I find utterly problematic. Because the reason why you could see that I have a sort of style is because I'm basically very, how could I say, I'm quite basic in what I do in architecture. Like, I have very few materials that I'm interested in dealing with, like, you know, glass, wood, concrete, bit of steel, but you know, it's like I'm not like playing with too many things. I don't want a palette to be too exhaustive, because I don't think I need it. I don't think we need it. I don't think it's necessary to be, you know, until something strikingly new and comes out that is inevitable to you, then yeah, sure. But otherwise, I don't think it's important. But then I think it goes a little bit in the same direction with sort of formal moves that we do in architecture, is that it's not, there are things that we are uninterested in because they are utterly inefficient. The whole sort of blob movement, you know, doing three-dimensional curves is proven, in my mind, to be inefficient. And unfortunately, I don't deal with inefficiency. I only deal with efficient things in architecture. So I can't go into that realm. I might not like it anyway, so it doesn't matter. But, you know, it's not something that I'm dragged towards anyway. So I'm not sure that, you know, it's a bad thing to have a recognized approach when everybody else has recognized approaches that don't have any substantial efficient value to me. I think it's okay that the approach that we have is recognizable and is that for a reason, actually. But you know, sure, I mean, I'm a curious person, so I would always be open to discovering and approaching different ways of handling creative thinking. I mean, for us, the only thing that matters is when we do a project, the better project has to be done. You know, it's not really like what I prefer. It's just what's best. You know? It's very rarely, you know, Gary-looking things. Whatever. Okay, I'm sorry, but you know, this was a lame answer. Thanks anyway for coming. See you guys.